So welcome everyone. My name's Anthony if it's your first time to the channel, and today I'm just going to address a question that I hear a lot from students, but especially to people who have never tried yoga or practiced yoga, and especially men. So, can I practice yoga if I'm inflexible? And the answer is yes, right? So the thing that is most important is to know where you are and to know what kinds of classes would be most beneficial for you from where you are, right? When I started practicing yoga, I couldn't even bend down 90 degrees. So from my legs at my hips, I couldn't bend 90 degrees, right? I was more like maybe like that. So putting my hands on something. And I wasn't comfortable sitting on the ground. So if I would sit on the ground, my elbow, my knees would be up in my elbows, right? And if you feel like this, you know what I'm talking about. And you feel like you can't sit upright because there's not enough flexibility in the hips and lower back to be able to sit with leaning your weight forward. You feel like you're going to roll back constantly, right? Fall back. So if this is where you are, it might be very uncomfortable to take a studio class or just to walk into any studio or any class anywhere and just take a class because they're probably going to start sitting on the ground, okay? So in that case, I would recommend practicing chair yoga for a while. This is one of the great benefits of it is that you can start in a seat where you're already comfortable sitting in that upright position, and then you can gradually increase your flexibility from there until you're comfortable sitting on the ground, right? You can gradually build up to that. And of course you can go to a class if you're uncomfortable sitting on the ground. You can use a block, but if you feel like you're rolling back constantly, you probably will be uncomfortable in a regular studio class. Unless you go to, there's a type of yoga called restorative yoga, where a lot of the postures are on the ground, lying down with props and supported. It's like a more relaxing type class, holding the postures for a longer time, not focused so much on flexibility, but more on relaxation. So if you're very uncomfortable sitting on the ground, even for a minute or a few minutes, then I would recommend doing some chair yoga first, or stretching yourself, increasing your flexibility first, or finding a very accessible class, and maybe like a chair hybrid class, like a class. There's plenty of classes on the channel like that, right, where you can build up first before you go try a studio class. There's seated to standing is perfect for that because you can increase your flexibility and get familiar with the standing postures. And then once you feel flexible enough and comfortable sitting on the ground, you can go to the yoga on the ground classes to get comfortable with those and learn the postures on the channel, or you can go to a class, try a class once you're comfortable sitting on the ground. But what you don't want to do is, I've seen a few people have a bad experience of yoga first because they went to a class that they weren't prepared for. So for your first class, don't go to some level 3 class or Ashtanga class or power class, something like that. Go to, if you could find a gentle class, is great, a gentle yoga class. Restorative yoga will be more like mind relaxing, so if you have a hard time staying still, that might be a little challenging, but physically it will be a lot more accessible. Or some sort of calming class, relaxing class. They have so many different names now, right? But something like that. It's also important to be familiar with the teacher. So maybe if you can read a little bit about the teacher, find out about the teacher, and look for someone with a background maybe of an injury. They got into yoga from an injury, because they'll understand where you are, where you're coming from. Or someone who focuses more on using props and making yoga accessible, gentle yoga, these kinds of things. Usually, and just in my experience, if a teacher tends to come more from like a fitness background or got into it from gymnastics or something like that, they tend to just assume that everybody is more comfortable in certain positions, that some people who aren't used to sitting on the ground or aren't currently flexible or don't have that type of background or played sports before or are flexible already are not comfortable in, okay? So I would talk to the teacher beforehand, let them know, right? Make them aware of what your situation, that you're new to it, that you don't know any of the postures, or that you're very tight. And I'm sure they'll offer suggestions, or props and modifications. The most important thing about classes is if something doesn't feel right, don't do it. Right? You're not under any obligation to do what the teacher's doing. Okay, so listen to your body always. Right? Use the modifications that you know. If you've seen modifications that we do in these classes here, or that you look up online beforehand, that's another thing. You can look how to modify postures beforehand so you know what to do so you're safe and comfortable in class. Just stick with it. The hardest thing about beginning from a very inflexible position in yoga is that it's extremely uncomfortable. Just be honest with you, It's extremely uncomfortable until you get past a certain point, and then the postures feel good, the stretches feel good, everything feels better, right? And you start to feel all the benefits. The benefits come with that. But I'll give you an example just with the seated posture, having your knees up like this. There's a point when the knees come down or relaxed, and where you feel like instead of your body rolling backwards all the time, you get to a point where it breaks that pivotal point, that halfway point, and you feel like your weight shifts forward. And then I'm really sitting on my sitting bones. And this is pretty comfortable. I feel like I could stay here. I don't feel like I'm struggling and using muscles to stay in the posture. And that's the point that you really start to enjoy it, okay? So it takes a lot of effort sometimes, especially if you're very inflexible, if you have very tight hamstrings, very tight back, or never practice anything on the ground, never sit on the ground. That's where I came from. Then it took a long time, very uncomfortable, very, very uncomfortable holding postures, and especially at first when the muscles are very tight, can be very, very painful even. And not sharp pain, that's not good, but there's a very strong discomfort while you're stretching at first. But once you get past that breaking point where when you're sitting and folding forward, you can break the point and fold forward. When you feel like you're leaning back and supporting yourself with your hands, yes, it feels very uncomfortable. But eventually with daily practice, you'll get there and you'll break the point where it feels good and you're folding and you're feeling good. Okay? So if you can stick with it to then until you get past that point of discomfort, right, where your body starts to open to the posture a little bit and become more flexible, then it's wonderful. And there's so much you can do from there to really heal yourself and God, so much benefits in the body and mind, right? So just stick with it daily, and it is uncomfortable at first, but it gets so much better, and it's so enjoyable and so wonderful once you do, okay? So I hope that answers any questions you had about that. And if you have any more questions that you'd like me to just share my experience about, or if I can help in any way, then just let me know in the comments and I'll see what I can do, okay? Until next time, take care.